Hello, my name is Kinsey Perkins, and this is my essay on abortion. So this wasn't written by me, of course. This was written by Judith Jarvis Thomson. This is simply an evaluation. So I wanted to start off with a disclaimer that this is a sensitive topic. It's going to be covering the topic of abortion, which is considered very taboo within society and can be a very sensitive issue. All of this is going off of the American philosopher Judith Jarvis Thomson's viewpoint on the issue, as well as her essay. I ask that everybody keeps an open mind throughout this dissection and evaluation of her essay, and I want everybody to know that my opinion will not be injected into this at all. This is simply an evaluation of her work. So the main ideas. The main ideas that we'll be covering I have put into a certain amount of bullet points. So the first one is begging the question of when a fetus can be considered a person and the morality of abortion. So she eventually does concede that even if a fetus was to be considered a person, it brings up the morality of what life is more important, the life of the mother or the life of the child. But we'll get into that in a minute. So, concedes upon the conception that a fetus can be considered human, and she relates that to something called the tree and acorn theory, which we will also talk about in a minute. And she covers the belief in bodily autonomy and freedom of life for all people. So everybody should have the right to life, correct? And the right to choose their own decisions in order to make the best life possible for oneself, in order to defend oneself and live a full life. She argues the freedom of choice for a person to defend their life. And finally, the idea that a person is not morally obligated to help another and is ranked as rather a kindness, and they should not be prosecuted for denying help, especially if it is harmful for the one helping. Now, an example of this would be a friend who comes up to you and says, "Hey, I want you to do me a favor." Are you a bad person or morally wrong if you deny them that favor? No, you're simply denying them of a favor. And you doing that would be a kindness. You have no obligation to do so. And let's say in the case that it is harmful, isn't it more morally wrong for them to ask for you to go through with that favor than it is for you to deny them? Just think on that for a minute. So, going back to the acorn and the tree theory, is an acorn the same as a tree? Same thing with a seedling. The relation of a fetus to a human in the essay is related to that of an acorn and a tree. Thomson argues that a newly fertilized ovum is simply a clump of human cells and has not developed in a human. So what she is saying in this is that much like a seedling or an acorn is either able to come into a tree or is part of a tree. So let's take the seed for example. A seed can become a tree, but does that mean that the seed is a tree already? Does that mean that you would label that seed as a tree? No, it's a seed. In the same way she's comparing an ovum, unfertile or fertilized egg, to that of a human. Is that ovum already a human? Or it is simply a clump of cells, much like a seed is just a seed and not a tree? She uses the argument that humans would not even categorize a seedling as a tree, even though it is technically able to grow into a tree, much like an ovum is able to grow into a human. She concedes the argument and uses other arguments to refute it. So basically she goes, okay, even if that is true, then that brings up a whole other slew of issues, which we are going to be going over right now. So she brings up the example of a violinist, absolutely famous violinist, that grows sick. The best violinist in the world has major kidney issues, something that is deadly, and you happen to be the only person who is a match, whether it is your blood type or anything else. You are kidnapped and wake up attached to machines with your kidneys being used to help detoxify the musician and must stay for 9 months or they will die. So basically, you had no choice in the matter. You were kidnapped, as she explains in her essay, and you are not aware of what happened. You just wake up, you're hooked up to all these machines, and they tell you, hey, we're music lovers, and we brought you here because that is the best violinist. We absolutely love them, and you have to stay here in order to help that person. You have to stay here for 9 months, give up your bodily autonomy, your time, and possibly your life, as she explains later, in order to save this other person. Now, would you say that's fair? No. Any reasonable person would say it is perfectly fine if that person who is hooked up to those machines would deny them of that fact. Now, why is that? Because you owe that person nothing, right? Well, an anti-choice person would argue that because that person is relying on you for their life, much like a baby is relying on a mother in their uterus in order to get the nutrition and sustenance it needs, this violinist is relying on you for your kidneys, your organs, everything else in order to keep them alive. Even though you don't know them, you don't owe them anything. They're relying on you. So they deserve for you to stay there, which doesn't make much sense. You have to give up your entire life, your entire bodily autonomy, your future for somebody you do not know and do not owe them anything. As relation to the whole favor scenario that I told you later about the friend who asked for a favor, correct? It wouldn't be wrong for you to say no. It'd be reasonable. So she later changes this argument with the possibility that a person could also die. So let's say if you're hooked up for 9 months, there's a possibility that you could die. So not only did you give up your entire body, but now it's almost a life in exchange for a life. Would you take that possibility? So, usually, pro-choice relates back, or not pro-choice, but pro-life relates back to whether a fetus is a human. But this can lead to a slippery slope, which is why we're bringing this up, and we're talking about it as if it is a human, right? So if a fetus has the same bodily autonomy as the woman that is carrying it, that means that you're obligated by pro-life, like rules and everything, to give up your body in order to keep that fetus alive, just like you're giving up your body in this scenario to keep this person alive. So, going off that argument, that means pro-life is saying that you must stay here because they're relying on you for life. You must stay here because you don't have a choice. So, she also compares this to the argument of the fetus and mother's choice to abortion. So moving on to part 2. Would you help the violinist for 9 months despite being brought there against your will? I want everybody to answer this if you get the chance, if you believe it is something that you want to answer. Obviously no forcing, but I think it's interesting to see other people's viewpoints on this. Following the pro-life, you should be obligated to keep them alive according to their argument, as I said earlier. How would you feel if it threatened your life? Would you feel that is fair? Are you obligated to stay there because that person is relying on you? How would you feel if it was against your will? Do you feel as though this is similar to forced pregnancy from rape? So, much like you didn't choose to be there, some women didn't choose to be pregnant. They didn't choose to engage in sexual contact to become pregnant, or there was a lack of consent that led them to be pregnant. And therefore it is not their fault. So if somebody was to say that, no, you're not obligated to stay there, you don't owe that man anything, that wasn't your choice, you could say the same thing for the topic of rape, would you not? According to Judith, of course. The case of rape and abortion. So going on to that topic, in accordance to the violinist, you are brought there against your will. Did you choose the route of leaving? In the case of rape against women, they have no choice to become pregnant. Is it then permissible for her to abort? If yes, does that mean the life of the fetus who is made from rape is less valuable than one that is not? So this leads to a whole other slippery slope. Because does that mean that if you say that it is okay, if you're not going the extremist route where you're saying that no matter what, you can never have an abortion, you can never have that choice, that the life of somebody conceived of rape is less than somebody who is not conceived of rape, even though it is not their fault. You see that how that starts to contrast a little bit. Why is this person's life less than this person's life? Therefore, why should you have the choice here, but not the choice there? The growing child and survival. So this comes up with the topic of defending oneself. Everybody should have the right to defend oneself, correct? So let's imagine that you were stuck in a space where a child is continuously going and you are trapped. As according to Judith, this is a scenario that she gave in her essay. Eventually, you are going to be crushed. Do you have the right to defend yourself despite the child being innocent? Does everyone have the right to life? So, you can either sit there and wait for this child to crush you eventually. You're in this small space, they're continuously growing, and the more they grow, the more you get squished. And eventually, you will die. And as I put in the bullet point below, only you will die. The child will not die if no action is taken. Does that mean the child's life is more valuable than your life? Just like in the case of a fetus potentially leading to a woman's death rather from birth or from complications. In this scenario, if it is okay for you to defend yourself in that scenario and do whatever you have to do in order to survive, is it wrong for a woman having a baby to do the same thing? Does your stance stay the same with the case of pregnancy threatening a person's life? Is her life less than the child? Bring this back to the violinist. So if you chose earlier that you would unplug yourself from the violinist, right? How is this not the same as right here? Your life is threatened. So you choose to unplug yourself, is what I gathered from her essay. She's saying if you would choose to unplug yourself in that scenario, or you would choose to defend yourself in this scenario of the growing child, why wouldn't you defend yourself in another scenario where a fetus is possibly destroying your body or leading to your death? This leads to a whole other slew of issues. Is another example of the police and a burglar. Because even if you have the right to defend yourself, some will say on extremists, on maybe pro-life, and there are extremists on both sides. Again, I'm not choosing a side. I'm just kind of stating what I gathered from her essay. That involving a third party would mean murder. So let's say you have the right to defend yourself so you can conduct your own abortion. That wouldn't be ethically correct. You don't have the education for that. But you should be allowed to go out and have the choice to do it in an ethical practice, correct? So many argue that a third party cannot be involved in the case of abortion despite the threat of a mother's life, saying it is murder. So what if a man broke into your house and threatened your life? In this case, it should be morally just to involve a third party to defend oneself, even if it must resort to the burglar losing their life. So let's say somebody breaks into your home. You do not have the things to protect yourself, right? Just like a woman would not have the knowledge to give herself a logical abortion, right? Something that'll keep her safe and from harm. And you end up calling the police. You end up calling a third party in order to come help you, such as a doctor in the case of the woman. That would be morally just, correct? So what about if you use the proper protection for the burglar? You set up a whole security system, and then they get past the security system. Does that mean it's morally just for them to be in there? That you have no right to call the police, that they are now welcome in that area? In the same instance, if a woman uses protection for sex, right? Everything that she possibly could have, like condoms, birth control, everything, right? And she still somehow ends up pregnant. Does that mean that she has no right to seek a third party after that because, they made it in? And does that mean they're suddenly welcome? Because clearly she did not want that to become the reality. It was not a conscious choice. It wasn't an invitation. So why should it be received as such? If you're okay with the burglar coming into your home, or not okay with the burglar coming into your home, but if they make it past your security system, is that automatically an invitation? No, right? So why wouldn't it be the same for the woman with the child? This is a quotation I took from page 12 of Thomson's essay. The emendation which may be made at this point is this: the right of life consists not in the right to be killed, but rather the right not to be killed unjustly. This is a risk of circularity, but never the mind. It would enable us to square the fact that the violinist has the right to life with the fact that you do not act unjustly towards him, unplugging yourself, thereby killing him. For if you do not kill him unjustly, you do not violate the right to life, and so it is no wonder you do him no injustice. So basically what this is saying is, you didn't make the conscious choice, or it wasn't your choice to be put in that situation. You made no promises to that man. This wasn't your responsibility, right? It's threatening your life, and you do not do him any injustice. You did not owe that man anything, and for him to ask you to give up your life, or possibly your time, your body, like everything else for him, would be unjust in itself. So you do not act unjustly in order to remove it, and the same could be said for a woman who conceived a child without wanting to. Quotations part 2. I suppose we may take it as a datum in this case that of pregnancy due to rape that the mother has not given the unborn person the right to use her body and food and shelter. And indeed, in what pregnancy could it be supposed the mother has given the unborn person such a right? It is not as if there are unborn persons drifting into the world to whom a man who the child says, I invite you in. So the woman says to the child, you're welcome, right, to come on in. And this goes back to the whole case of the burglar, right? You didn't let that burglar in, right? He got past your security system, even though you didn't want him inside. Does that mean he's welcome inside? No. So it'd be the same case for this, correct? So if you have the right to remove that burglar from your home, and that is just and that is morally correct, why wouldn't you have the right to get rid of something else that did not have an invitation to enter your body the same way? So the philosopher that I related or thought of most during this essay, for some reason, was John Stuart Mill, where pain establishes as something is morally wrong. And it was kind of interesting because when I was going over everything, it talked a lot about bodily autonomy, right? And right versus wrong. And people would argue like a lot about the whole whose life is more than the other, right? And utilitarianism is the outcome if something is morally right for an individual depends on the pleasure that comes from the outcome. Depends on the pleasure that comes from the outcome, and that kind of reminded me of the fact that this would cause you so much pain in order to be put in that scenario of, you know, having to choose between yourself and this violinist, right? And I feel like it just reminded me of that because it's just a pain versus pain scenario. So for some reason I found that really interesting. I was trying to figure out what John Stuart Mill would have done in this situation. So I just wanted to kind of interact with you guys and ask you what you think he would have done. It also reminded me of the trolley problem, 1 versus 5 on a train track. You have to choose which one. Would you choose the 5 or would you choose the 1? Which is also something covered by Judith, which was really cool. And lastly is the strength of the argument. And whether you agree with this or not, you have to examine the argument in its integrity as well as its use of logic. And from what I have seen, she's very logical. She doesn't use anything that is too out there in her examples. And she answers all of the main points from her opposition, the pro-life movement, because she is a pro-choice advocate with reasonable comparisons and logic. So she doesn't do anything too out there. She answers all of them very directly with relation back to the main subject and how those stories and scenarios relate back in. She relates the topic of abortion with bodily autonomy and the rights of people for the rights for life while still arguing for pro-choice. So she recognizes that everybody has the right to life, but explains why that abortion still should be necessary despite that. She leaves no room for argument, as all points in Thomson's makes are aware of which a reasonable human would agree with. So all of the topics that she says are something that somebody who is reasonable would agree with, such as the robber scenario, the violinist scenario. So altogether, I found her essay very, very intriguing. And I never thought of anything in these type of lights before. It was a totally new outlook on all of it. And I want you guys to kind of like answer about how you feel when it comes to weighing the bodily autonomy of one person versus another. Thank you so much for watching my presentation, and have a great day.